Good day, listeners, viewers, family, and friends. Welcome back to a special episode of After the Show, where we announce our pick for Game of the Year 2020. Before we get started, do you want to talk about your methodology or your philosophy when you made your choice, Adam?
Okay, well, as I said previously, quite frankly, it's purely just down to enjoyment. I know a lot of things factor into that. Obviously, story, characters, progression, the world, the gameplay loop. Uh, those are all part of it. But in the end, it's really just about how much fun I had playing the game. And the description that I gave earlier was if I finish the game and I'm like, oh man, I just want more. Why is it over? Or if I finish the game and I'm like, if they release a sequel, I am buying that sight unseen. You just tell me the name, I'll give you my money. For me, that's the kind of game that's going to be a contender for game of the year. And if I'm being honest with myself, it was actually a pretty easy choice this year for me. So,
Okay. For me, it was a difficult choice because, as I mentioned in the game show, I don't tend to finish many games anymore, and I buy far fewer games the year they are released. Combine that with my gaming habit being tied to my emotions, then you have me playing a lot, but not actually finishing that much. That being said, my philosophy for my choice was that it had to be a game where I spent a good portion of my time that left me feeling happy, satisfied. It didn't have to be a perfect game, but a game that was worthy of not just me, but anyone new who wanted to play it.
all right. And thanks for clarification, Crian, because with that, we're going to get into the show. So, we're going to do this a little differently. Crian doesn't know what my game of the year is, although I'm pretty sure he actually does. But I haven't told him officially, and we're going to invite our audience to play along and see if they can guess what our individual game of the year is. So mine's probably going to give it away like in the first 20 seconds. So it is a PS4 game and it was released this July. So I don't actually have too much history with this game myself, but because it is a new IP, but I was inspired to play it because I have played other similar games that were kind of in the same vein that I absolutely loved. And knowing that this was going to be in that same vein, I was just kind of like, okay, you know what? I'm going to have to give this a try. And those are games like Assassin's Creed, Horizon Zero Dawn, The Witcher, Tenchu, that sort of thing. So just that kind of action adventure, third person running around, that sort of thing. So when I saw that this game was coming out, I was like, absolutely, I'm gonna have to play this one. And the reason I decided to get it was mostly Horizon Zero Dawn, but to a lesser extent, also Infamous, which is probably going to give you a big hint right there because it is made by the same guys that made Infamous. And I really enjoyed Infamous when I played it. And so because of that, I was like, all right, you know what? These guys are probably going to do a good job on this one too. Uh, so basically, it is a originally thinking I was thinking going into it that it was going to be kind of a Tenchu stealth assassin style game, kind of or a Metal Gear Solid, don't get caught. If you do, it's going to be a big deal, so you definitely have to stealth your way through it. But I was actually quite surprised that I ended up not stealthing my way through a good chunk of the game. You can definitely brute force your way through most of it. There are some parts of it where they require you to be stealthy for story purposes, but for the bulk of the game, you can really just charge in there, guns blazing, so to speak, and just force your way through it. And for me, that was actually it was kind of interesting because now that I've played that game and now I'm playing Assassin's Creed, and it's really interesting because I used to think playing through these games that, and I don't know if this is me or if this is a game design choice, but I remember playing older games like Tenchu or something like that, and stealth always seemed to be the faster way to do things. Even in, I think Metal Gear Solid, typically stealth is the quicker way to reach your objective. If you get caught in battle, then you're going to be kind of held down, and it's going to take a while to get the alarms to go off. And I don't know if that was a design change in modern times or if this is just I always thought that that was the case, and so that was the way I've always played it. But in this game and in playing in Assassin's Creed, I've noticed that just running straight in and fighting the enemy typically is now the faster way to get objectives done. So stealth can definitely be fun, it can be rewarding, but with stealth you kind of have to plan enemy routes and wait for opportunities, and and then get them and move away. But when you take the direct approach, it's just kind of like run in, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, we're done, so like, and then they're running at you, you don't have to seek them out, right? So yeah, definitely, it was definitely faster just to run straight in and be aggressive about it. So that was kind of an interesting change, but you could definitely still stealth it out, and I think it actually worked out pretty well that you were doing kind of a combination of the two, in that you would probably start off a little bit stealthy and then you'd get caught, and then you would have to fight for a bit, and then you kind of hide out, and then the enemies are searching for you, and then you go back into kind of a stealth mode and stealth a couple, stealth kill a few more, and then then they kind of get wise to you. So there was kind of an interesting combination of it there. uh the story wasn't super strong, it wasn't bad, it was just, it's pretty standard. It's a good story overall. It's fairly, it's well written, the characters are pretty well done, but it's not like something that's, oh my god, this is completely revolutionary in terms of story. It's a pretty standard, it's kind of like a Marvel movie. It's not gonna wow you with the plot, but it's not a bad plot. It's still pretty good, right? Uh, but the side stories are actually where I felt that this game shined the most, where it was talking about some of the side characters. So, for example, one of the stories which really kind of touched me was you meet kind of the caretaker of the main character from when he was a little boy, and she's this older lady, and at first she's just kind of this giving you advice and helping you do what you need to do, but as you do her missions she starts to develop dementia, and it gets to the point where at the very beginning she's calling you by name, and she's completely coherent, and then towards in some of the later ones, like occasionally, like once or twice, she might call you by your father's name instead of your name. And then by the end of it, like where she's just like right at the end, you can tell she's just not there, and she's calling you by your father's name, and she's talking to you about things that had happened, after the main character's mother died, and she's telling the father like, oh, I feel so bad for you because you lost your wife and you're stuck with your little son, and I know it must be really hard, and I just wish I could be there for you. And she's kind of pouring her heart out and admitting that she kind of has feelings for him and stuff like that. And the character, he's like, it's one of those things where like this woman's old, she's at the end of her line, and he could have easily just tried to like wake her up, but instead he kind of played along with it, and he just kind of was like, agreeing with her, and he's like, oh, you've been a loyal friend and you've always been there for us and stuff like that. And uh just let her believe that he was the father, and that she was talking to. And it was very kind of touching that he kind of wanted her to be comfortable at the end, and he didn't want to confuse her, so he just kind of played along so she could have that moment. And that was just a very beautiful scene for me, just that whole kind of dialogue. And a lot of the other side stories are like that too. A woman who is betrayed and her family is killed, and she's trying to get revenge on the people that betrayed her family, but then she kind of realizes that uh things that she thought were okay were actually a lot of the people. Like, for instance, there was a poor woman who basically was a peasant that they took in, and they took good care of her, and whatever. But from her perspective, she was always a servant. She was never, from the noble woman's perspective, like, oh, we took you in, we gave you food, we gave you a house, you should be grateful. You would have been starving, you would have been alone. But then from this other woman's perspective, it's like, I was always a servant, I was never a person. I was always, I wasn't free to do what I wanted to, and that sort of thing. So it was really good that it kind of showed these different perspectives of different characters and whatnot. Um, so I think the side stories were really where the story shined for me. And yeah, it wasn't too many twists or turns. It was pretty straightforward. There wasn't any kind of like big reveal that there often are in these games now. I feel like a lot of people want to do that M. Night Shyamalan kind of like, oh, the bad guy was actually this person, or something like that. But they didn't do anything like that. It was pretty straightforward. Um, But the combat was really where this shined. Most games do not have this depth of combat. It really was, there's parrying, there's dodging, there's different stances, it's just really, really well done. And I could just sit there and be like, just give me a game where it's just lines of enemies and I'll fight one and I'll fight the next one and I'll fight the next one. And that's all I'm going to do. And I would still enjoy it because it was just really, really, really well done. And also, one thing that I really, really enjoyed was that they did tack on a multiplayer mode at the end. Every game has to have multiplayer these days, right? But they did a really good job with it, and it was really, really fun. And it was just kind of a way to explore newer things. Now, some of the things that were really, really good about it that I really enjoyed was obviously the combat was really, really good. There were always multiple approaches to achieving your goals. So it wasn't typically just a one straight path. It was you can go this way or you can go that way. You can come in directly guns blazing, or you could kind of sneak your way through. And if you wanted to, you could kill your guys on your way in, or you could go the other way, sneak all the way to the back and then kill from the back to the front, or whatever you wanted to do like that. And like I said, the story wasn't particularly inspired, but the side quests are really good. The things that I wouldn't say there was anything really bad about it, but some of the things that I think could have been improved on was I would have liked a little more variety in the weapons in the combat. So combat was really, really good, but it would have been really fun to see a bigger variety of weapons that you could have used, because you're really just using the one in different ways. The music is good, but it's not particularly memorable. If you asked me to hum one of the songs from the game, I couldn't hum a single one. They were all very good, but they were all kind of very in the background. You're not really paying attention to it. So the music isn't particularly good. The multiplayer, while I absolutely loved it, is far too short. It's really just kind of I feel that what they really should do is make a new multiplayer game that just focuses on the multiplayer of this. I would instantly buy that if they did it. But if they fleshed out the multiplayer into its own full game, I would be 100% on it. And the other thing that I really didn't like was the controls that they used in the main game and the controls that they used in multiplayer were actually slightly different. So the way you could access, because multiplayer basically is one aspect of the main character from the game. So one might be like focused on his ranged abilities, one might be focused on kind of his tankiness, one will focus on his stealth. So because of that, they didn't have the main character has to have access to a whole bunch of abilities, whereas in multiplayer they don't have to have access to quite so many abilities. And because of that, they were able to kind of simplify the controls. But going back after the fact, I was kind of like, oh, they actually could have used a lot of those same controls for the main character, which actually would have been, in my opinion, simpler to use. But they didn't do that. So I would have liked to have the controls to be a little more consistent between the two, because sometimes it was a bit jarring where I would go through and for example, in multiplayer, if you want to use certain abilities, you have to hold down R1 and then you can click, square, triangle, circle, or X, and it'll use that ability. Whereas in the main game, you would have to hold down R2 and then with the left analog stick, select which ability, and then you'd hit R1 and it would immediately use that ability. And I would have just preferred if it was just hold down R1 and click a second button, because I feel like that would have been a lot easier for me than having to kind of navigate a menu, select the right one, then go back and press R1. So I feel like they actually refined the controls for multiplayer, but then they didn't give you the option to use those controls in the main game. And I really wish they kind of had. So why this is a game of the year game for me is because everything just blends together in a way that is exceptionally polished. I mean, like I said, this isn't really offering anything new, but it just does everything so well and blends them together so well that I just think it really just absolutely deserves it. And for what it's worth, it actually won Player's Choice in the Game of the Year awards. So I am not the only person that feels this way. It did not win the Game of the Year, but players the players only account for 10% of the vote for the Game of the Year, and the other 90% belongs to the professional critics. So we the players actually by a pretty large margin, if I remember correctly, voted for this game, but it still lost because the critics outweighed us or whatever. Um, so yeah, but yeah, and yeah, just on a side note, like I said, it's just extremely well polished. And for example, when Witcher 3 won Game of the Year, everyone was saying like, "Oh, it's so innovative. The way it does story is so innovative." And it was, and for me, it was like, no, this isn't doing anything that BioWare hasn't already done with Mass Effect or BioWare hasn't already done with Dragon Age. It's just they're just polished it. It's just the story is just the way they do it is really refined, and they just made it so that everything kind of fits together a little bit better. And that for me is exactly this. It's just it's not doing anything particularly new, but it's just doing it in such a fresh and polished way that nobody's ever really done it this way before. So
Okay.
I think it's pretty obvious.
After you said it won Game of the Year, I'm like, oh, okay, yep. Uh, that confirmed the choice for me. So I should have queued up a nice, cool drum roll effect. I have to save that for 2021. And Adam's game is Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. I mean, plus you have access to the video, right? So
Well, you did name it Not So Mysterious Game, and I just wrote it as Adam's game as well in OVS so that I wouldn't
yeah,
think about it. But no,
but
Jesus, the initial 5 seconds of the video is like, oh yes, I've seen this 4 or 5 times already.
yeah. Yeah, so but yeah, this is all footage of my own gameplay. I went back and got some footage and whatnot. So this is all beautiful Adam Gray gameplay footage of Ghost of Tsushima in 1920p. So yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. And the use of color, I gotta say, is absolutely great in this game. The way they do sunsets, the way they do sunrises, the way they do different parts of the map will have different indigenous flowers. You'll run into places and it'll just be fields of white flowers or a mountain just covered in lilac flowers. And it's just really, really beautiful in the way they use color here. And it actually kind of fits the story too, because early on, it's very bright, and then by the time you get to the end of the game, you're getting kind of the snowy area, and things are getting more bleak. So the color palette kind of condenses down into more of these duller colors and stuff like that. So it really does fit the story quite well.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
great artistic
what
work.
do you think? You know, because this is a very popular game. I think most people, when you started talking about it, probably already knew as well. What do you
I'm sure they
expect
did.
from the developer? What do you expect from the game in 2021?
I don't think we're going to see another game in 2021. I don't think we're going to see any patches in 2021. They have announced that the multiplayer that what they've released is all they're going to do. They released the multiplayer, and then later on they updated it with its first raid, and they said that's it. We're not going to add any more multiplayer for this game. So unfortunately, I think this game is officially done. Uh, so I don't think we're going to be seeing any more patches and stuff like that. Now we might see some patches that make it kind of a PS5 version of it. So we might see something like that that adds maybe 60 frames per second or that sort of thing. But I don't think we're going to see too much in terms of the game itself. But that said, after the success of Ghost of Tsushima, because it did do so well, Sucker Punch did go ahead and apparently they were looking for someone to fill a job position for a person who was quite familiar with Japanese history because they want to turn this into a franchise and they are already thinking about what game they want to do next. And they do want to represent, at least in some capacity, real events that actually happened in history. So in this case, it is the Mongolian invasion of Tsushima, which ultimately ended up failing. And then they actually had a second invasion later on. So all the characters are fictional, but the events or the event itself, the overarching plot event is true. I think even the bad guy is real. I think he was actually a person as well. I'm not quite sure though. But they are looking into other parts of Japanese history, and they will be making a second one at some point. Now, again, I don't think that will come out in 2021. These games typically take a long while to develop, so maybe 2024, 2025 is probably when we could see something like that. But yeah,
Okay. Thank you very much for that. That is a game I hope I get a chance to uh, play on your PlayStation 5 at some point if I don't get one at some point.
Yeah, and I absolutely hope that this game comes out on PC just as Horizon Zero Dawn did.
Oh, that's also a good option
Um,
as well.
yeah, I really hope that this one does because this is one of those games where it's just really, really good, and I really hope that everybody gets a chance to play it at some point.